This is God. 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 It's relatively easy for us to imagine God as the totality of the universe or the subatomic workings of multiple material worlds. I think it's relatively easy anyway. And I also think that more of us than not understand Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, and others as incarnations, prophets, or avatars of God. But seeing God in the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world is, for most of us, more challenging. Yet, if we believe God is more than a Marvel Studios caricature reclining on a cosmic rocket chair, if we genuinely appreciate God as the fundamental love energy of the multiverse, if we're practicing seeing the world through the non-dual consciousness of Jesus and Buddha, then we must recognize and wrestle with God's love manifest in disagreeable and perhaps even dangerous people. If we have trouble wrapping our minds around the idea that God is manifest in both warmongers and peacebringers, well, consider the story of Noah or Job or the genocides of the Canaanites and the Egyptian firstborn. God is pretty nasty in the First Testament, flooding the world, torturing faithful disciples, literally thwarting the Israelites' freedom by hardening Pharaoh's heart, and generally demanding fealty and worship, lest he throw a Trumpian-style infantile fit and make the field lay fallow for a generation. That God is an egotistical megalomaniac throughout much of the First Testament is not a commentary on the nature of God, by the way, but an ingenious way to remind us in whose image we are made and a warning against making God in ours. Imagining God looks and acts like us, full of hate, ready to go to war, is perhaps the most blasphemous thought possible. Thinking God is on our side creates religions of hatred and fear, thick-walled, frigid, concrete bunkers of heartless psychosis. Unfortunately, millions of concrete people live in these self-made prisons, and they are as impenetrable. Reason, facts, science, and history, compassion, concern for the common good and the public welfare are all lost on the concrete people, whose thickness must be obliterated if they're to see anew, as Paul says, no longer through a mirror dimly, but now with a consciousness that sees the gloriously inclusive totality of reality. Jesus, even though he's misunderstood and abused by the concrete people who loudly proclaim his name and violently thump a Bible he wouldn't recognize, Jesus rescues. Jesus saves, you could say, saves us from turning to stone, trapped in the concrete bunker. Because Jesus teaches and shows us how to practice genuinely unconditional love, the only energy that eradicates fear and replaces hate with understanding. Love obliterates concrete. The peaceful, equitably prosperous, happy and free global society that Jesus imagined and tasks his disciples with creating will never happen as long as we remain concrete people too afraid to leave the closed-minded but comfortable bunkers of our biased and bigoted psyches. Jesus shows us how to dissolve our concrete barriers and break through the walls of the bunker. His willingness to sit and eat with and touch society's untouchables is perhaps his most shockingly powerful and important act. By ignoring society's rules about who can do what with and to whom, Jesus jackhammers the idea that someone isn't good enough to eat with the king, or that any of us are so magnificent that we're too good to eat with somebody else. Jesus ate with lepers and tax collectors. Would you have dinner with Marjorie Taylor Greene? What about Nancy Pelosi? Barack Obama? Donald Trump? If you're a follower of Jesus, the only answer is an unequivocal yes to all of them. But Jesus also makes it clear that to commune with someone, to send God's love to someone we disagree with, does not mean we accept and support their heinous politics or theology. Jesus preaches, love your neighbor or love your enemy, yes, but he calls out his adversaries for their hypocrisies. Loving the MTGs of the world doesn't mean approving of their thoughts and actions, merely that we acknowledge everyone is created of the same fundamental God material as we. If we're all fundamentally God and God is love, then we are all love. All of us. Whatever God force exists in us, compelling us to think about new, more equitable and compassionate global systems, is also in everyone, whether or not they agree with us. Somewhere, buried beneath all those layers of intolerance, itself caused by fear and uncertainty, deep in every bigoted persona, the spark of God's unconditional, compassionate love brightly burns. It just has to be discovered. And fortunately, Jesus has some great instructions on how to light the darkness. In Luke chapter 6, verses 27 to 31, Jesus says to do this: love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, offer the other one as well. Will Smith. If someone takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt either. Give to everyone who asks, and don't demand your things back from those who take them. Treat people in the same way you want them to treat you. We break the barriers of fear, uncertainty, and hate by practicing love. Be love. Do love. Love everything. Don't just talk about it, do it. Love yourself, love your families, love your grocer, your congressperson. Love Putin, love Trump, love Hillary. Love MTG because it's obvious she needs it. Lots of it. Learn how to do love, like Jesus. What does that mean? How do we do love? How can we exude love in a visceral way, so it's not just more useless thoughts and prayers? Because the world doesn't need more platitudes. It needs love. Doing love means we actively radiate understanding to even those we don't understand. It means we're compassionate, especially to those who would withhold compassion from others. It means we feed the hungry and encourage the wealthy to contribute more to the poor. We teach the politics of Jesus' demand that his disciples build a new society from the bottom up instead of goose-stepping with the empire. Doing love means we use every implement our communities and governments provide and invent new ones if necessary to peacefully resist our continued commoditization and dehumanization. I recently tried an experiment on the subway. I looked at the people on the subway and I tried to love them. I tried to do love, right? The way Jesus says that we should love our neighbor. I did my best, my absolute best, to channel God's love through my entire being and then intentionally direct it out to other people on the train, right? From God, through God, to God. I sent feelings of compassion and understanding, and I meditated on the idea that we are essentially one God particle in a physical space that, in this instance, just happens to be manifesting as a train full of strangers riding around through a hole in the ground. A metaphor, by the way, that has not gone unnoticed, but which we'll have to come back to another day. Doing love, not just abstracting about it, doing love was an exceptionally difficult exercise. Because, for one thing, staring at someone on the subway is sort of like saying, hey, come over here and stab me. But, more importantly, it's hard to love a stranger. Our culture places so much emphasis on romantic love that we struggle to imagine loving someone without those romantic feelings attached. But it's agape love that Jesus proclaims. Agape love is God's love. It's benevolent, and it's filled with the goodwill of all. When Jesus commands us to love, it's with all our hearts, yes, but it's also with our minds and our souls. Jesus isn't talking about acting like some ingenue cub reporter finally melting the heart of the aloof Prince of Belgravia by winning the Christmas competition on a Netflix movie. Jesus wants us to love much more profoundly, filled with God's agape love, which isn't a flight of romantic fantasy, but is instead very tricky and committed and faithful and transcendent. It's a love that reminds us God exists not only in the people we like, but also in the people we don't. Because God's love is unconditional, and ours should be too. Amen. Our question to consider today: where are you too concrete? Where might we be too concrete in our thinking, in our practices, anything like that? I'll send you into breakout rooms for a few moments to discuss in small groups, and then we'll get back together to share our thoughts and discoveries with each other.